Welcome, my fellow thrill seekers, to a spine-tingling journey into the unknown. And today, we're diving deep into the darkest corners of our educational institutions, where unsettling mysteries and unsolved horrors await. Get ready to be chilled to the bone as we uncover the 10 scariest true school horror stories. But before we begin, if you're a fan of the macabre, the mysterious, and the downright terrifying, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. It's the only way to stay updated on all the hair-raising stories we uncover. And if you'd like to support our channel, you'll find the link in the description below. Now, let's open the pages of this chilling chronicle and unearth the horrors that have taken place within school walls. But beware, my friends, for what you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. One day when I was a junior in high school, the bell had just rung and I was on my way to art class. It was located at the furthest end of the school, so I briskly walked, trying to make it on time. The clock ticked and my steps echoed in the empty hallway. Little did I know, this seemingly ordinary day would soon take an unimaginable turn. At 0:32, an announcement resonated through the school's intercom. It was the secretary from the front desk, her voice trembling with fear as she uttered the words that would change everything. The school had been placed on lockdown, and this was no mere drill. Silence followed her chilling proclamation, a moment of collective disbelief. Then, at 1 o'clock, chaos erupted like a tempest. Students, once bustling in the corridors, became a frenzied torrent, papers and books becoming flotsam in their wake. Panic was an uninvited guest, and fear was the dominant emotion. I was close to my destination, the art room, and my adrenaline-fueled sprint brought me there in no time. The room was a whirlwind of confusion, students darting in every direction. The teacher, perhaps the only one with a semblance of control, decided to take charge. At 1:29, the door was closed and locked, sealing us in. We collectively turned off the lights, shrouding ourselves in darkness. In the back of the classroom, we gathered away from the window, hoping to remain unnoticed. The silence within the room at 2:06 was deafening, despite the presence of over 30 people. We sat in breathless anticipation, wrestling with our worst fears. Was this an actual threat or just a cruel ruse? The uncertainty gnawed at us, our imaginations running wild. At this moment, the teacher's phone chimed, and at 2:35, her eyes widened as she read a message in a hushed voice. She delivered the ominous news that sent shivers down our spines. A murder had occurred in a neighborhood near the school, and the police suspected the killer might be hiding nearby, possibly within our very school. The classroom became a crucible of emotions. At 2:47, a young girl broke down, tears and tremors seizing her. Other students rallied around her, attempting to provide solace amidst the turmoil. We were a sea of fear and uncertainty, adrift in this surreal nightmare. Sitting closest to the supply closet, I was tasked with a crucial mission at 2:54. The teacher asked me to retrieve a blanket. The supply closet, usually mundane, now appeared ominous. It was a spacious walk-in closet, lined with shelves bearing art supplies. As I scanned for a blanket, my heart skipped a beat. In the back corner of the closet, behind long pieces of fabric used for sewing projects, I spotted a pair of dirty shoes. Someone was hiding there, concealed in the shadows. Panic gripped me, and a chilling realization coursed through my veins. Could this be the murder suspect? My heart raced, but I knew that revealing my discovery would only escalate the danger. At 2:59, I grabbed the blanket, feigning ignorance, and discreetly turned off the closet lights. I shut the door behind me, concealing the hidden figure, and handed the blanket to the distressed girl. Approaching the teacher, I whispered what I had seen at 3:12. She could see the terror in my eyes, but she remained composed. With quiet determination, she sent a message to the front desk, alerting them to our situation. 10 agonizing minutes of silence passed. At 3:23, the teacher's phone chimed again. Her expression changed, and she made an announcement that we had all been waiting for. We were to leave the classroom calmly and head to the middle school across the street. The school needed to be cleared, and our safety relied on our cooperation. As we ventured into the unknown, part of me feared that the suspect might give chase. But at 3:23, the closet door remained sealed. We sprinted to the middle school, hearts racing, feet pounding against the pavement. Hours passed like eternities as we waited for our parents to arrive. That night, the news delivered the culmination of our harrowing experience. The SWAT team had successfully captured the suspect without harm to any of the students. Relief washed over us, but the memory of that day would forever be etched in our minds. Even now, a shiver runs down my spine whenever I go near that supply closet. It serves as a chilling reminder of the day when an ordinary school day transformed into a chapter of sheer terror and survival. A chapter one will never forget, a day to remember. One day, as I was walking to my math class, a seemingly ordinary morning took an unexpected turn. A friend intercepted me, inquiring if I was prepared for the test scheduled for that day. My heart sank as I responded with confusion, convinced that the test wasn't until the following week. However, she insisted that the test was indeed today and that she had spent the entire night studying for it. Panic began to set in. I was utterly unprepared for a test that carried significant weight in my overall grade. In my desperation, I concocted a hasty plan. I asked my friend to inform the teacher that I was feeling unwell and intended to take refuge in the bathroom, a feeble attempt to escape the impending test. She agreed to cover for me, and I hastily ducked into the nearest restroom. I entered the last stall at 0:19, intending to while away the time on my phone while the test proceeded without me. As I hung my backpack on the stall door's hook, an unexpected twist of fate unfolded. An announcement suddenly pierced the silence through the intercom, a voice I recognized as the school principal. He declared that the school was now under lockdown due to an emergency. Initially, I brushed it off as a routine drill, something we had rehearsed before. However, my complacency vanished at 0:32 when all the lights plunged into darkness. This was unprecedented. None of our drills had involved such total blackness. Panic surged anew as I contemplated whether this was more than just a practice run. Desperate for information, I frantically texted my friend from math class, seeking clarity on the situation. Her response, received promptly, sent a shiver down my spine. She explained that a male student had been spotted threatening another with a knife. The altercation, rumored to be over a girl, had escalated, and the aggressor was rumored to be dangerously unhinged. My heart pounded in my chest, and fear gripped me. I realized I had little to no protection in this vulnerable situation. At 1 o'clock, I climbed up onto the toilet seat, hiding my feet to remain inconspicuous. In the pitch darkness, I strained to listen to the ominous sounds outside the stall. Minutes passed, feeling like hours, until I heard footsteps at 1:29. Someone entered the bathroom, their sobs echoing through the tense air. My racing thoughts struggled to discern whether it was a boy or a girl seeking refuge. They occupied the stall adjacent to mine and shut the door, their presence a chilling reminder of the imminent danger. At 1:53, a metallic object clattered to the floor, catching my attention. I peered down and saw the glint of a long, silver knife's point. Panic coursed through me, my mind paralyzed by fear. In my sheer terror, instincts took over, and at 2:06, I made a desperate decision. Unlocking the stall door, I bolted into the dimly lit hallways at full sprint, my heart pounding in my chest. Fear fueled every step, every breath. I ran until I reached the safety of the outdoors, my arms raised in surrender. At 2:47, I found myself face to face with an army of police officers. They patted me down and, in a trembling voice, I recounted the details of where the suspect could be found. Fortunately, the situation was resolved without any harm befalling anyone. The assailant had not followed through on his threats. Ultimately, at 3:23, the suspect faced severe legal consequences and never returned to our school. What had started as an ordinary day spiraled into a day of sheer panic and survival, etching an indelible memory that would stay with me forever. When I was a sophomore in high school, I had a day I would never forget. It was just another ordinary afternoon in geometry class, and I was seated next to my best friend, Kayla. The teacher had wrapped up the day's lesson early, giving us the rest of the class to get a head start on our homework. Kayla, always the math whiz, was patiently explaining a problem that I couldn't quite grasp. As we huddled over our textbooks, ready to tackle the mathematical mysteries before us, our world was abruptly shattered. The intercom crackled to life, interrupting the peaceful hum of the classroom. A voice, tinged with urgency, announced that we were under an active lockdown, instructing everyone to shelter in place immediately. Kayla and I exchanged bewildered glances. Lockdown drills were a routine part of our school experience, but this felt different. Typically, teachers were informed in advance about these drills, preparing us for what was coming. However, this time, our teacher's expression mirrored our confusion. She had received no such warning. The gravity of the situation began to weigh on us as we watched our teacher lock the classroom door and extinguish the lights, plunging us into darkness. A chill ran down my spine, for this was no ordinary drill. With a collective sense of urgency, we decided to barricade ourselves inside our classroom. The heavy metal desks that once held our textbooks were now our shields against an unknown threat. In the dimness, we maneuvered the desks to block the door, determined to keep whatever danger lurked outside at bay. Huddled together in a corner of the room, tension filled the air. I found refuge underneath the teacher's desk, alongside a few other students. Silence enveloped us as we anxiously checked our phones, searching for answers amid the unsettling uncertainty. I began scrolling through a news app, hoping to uncover the source of our distress. At 0:19, the news revealed a terrifying truth. A deranged man, believed to be under the influence of drugs, had been involved in an assault dangerously close to our school. Worse yet, there were speculations that he might have entered our school premises and remained at large. I couldn't withhold this distressing information from my fellow classmates. At 0:32, I shared the grim news, and the room filled with a collective gasp. Fear washed over us, turning the once familiar classroom into a chamber of anxiety and dread. As the minutes ticked away, uncertainty clung to us like a suffocating shroud. A few girls could no longer contain their tears, and some students reached for their phones, desperately attempting to contact their parents. I too was gripped by fear, thinking of my younger sister, a freshman who was somewhere else in the building. With a trembling hand, I sent a message to my sister, seeking assurance of her safety and hoping for any information she might have. 15 agonizing minutes passed before she replied, her text confirming the grim reality of the situation. Someone had been relentlessly banging on her classroom door, their voice a cacophony of profanities. Panic had engulfed her and her classmates for the last 10 minutes, but mercifully the assailant had moved on. Fearing the consequences of revealing this to my classmates, I decided to keep this unsettling information to myself. At 1:29, an eerie stillness prevailed as we held our collective breaths. However, our respite was short-lived. A sudden chilling sound echoed through the hallway, an ominous banging at our classroom door. The disembodied laughter of a crazed individual penetrated our fortress of desks. The intruder taunted us, his voice dripping with malice, at 1:53. He boasted of having a gun, insisting there was no point in hiding, for he would find us. His words sent shivers down our spines as we huddled together, our fear intensified by the knowledge that our barricade was the only thing separating us from a potential threat. Our teacher, composed and resolute, remained on the phone with 911, providing them with a whispered account of the nightmare unfolding within our classroom. Then, at 2:06, a deafening gunshot reverberated through the hallway. It was as if time itself had frozen, and the entire room cried out in terror. The man outside responded with maniacal laughter, a chilling cacophony that pierced our souls. However, amidst the chaos and fear, there were voices of authority, distant but unmistakable. Shouts from police officers reverberated through the hallway, their commands growing louder and more insistent. They demanded the man drop his weapon. For several agonizing minutes, the standoff persisted, with the intruder defiantly refusing to comply. At 2:47, our fragile sanctuary seemed poised to shatter at any moment. Then, the cacophony of confrontation reached its climax. The police officers, unwavering in their duty, decided to take action. At 3:12, they tasted the man, and his screams of agony echoed through the hallways. Around 30 more minutes of uncertainty passed before the tension began to ease. Finally, at 3:23, we received the news we had been praying for. The school had been cleared of danger. The assailant was taken into custody, and we were free to go. It was a day etched into our memories, a stark reminder of the fragility of our sanctuary and the courage that could be found in the face of terror. When I was in high school, we had a teacher named Mr. Dickinson. He taught both history and government. Typically, you would take history your junior year and government your senior year, so you would have him 2 years in a row. When I first met him in my junior year, I thought he was the nicest person. He seemed genuinely passionate about teaching, and he had a lot of patience, even with the kids who were a little slower to learn. He let students retake tests if they did poorly and arrived at school early in the morning to tutor those who needed extra help. Mr. Dickinson quickly became one of my favorite teachers, and it seemed he genuinely liked me. Towards the end of our junior year, Mr. Dickinson's life took an unexpected turn. His wife had a baby boy named Matthew, and he was over the moon with happiness. He proudly displayed a photograph of his son on his desk and often regaled us with stories about Matthew's first crawl and first steps. It was clear that he was a doting and proud father. But as my senior year began, Mr. Dickinson's idyllic life crumbled. Rumors spread through our small town like wildfire. We learned that his wife, Carol, had been cheating on him with one of their neighbors, a betrayal that had been ongoing for years, even before they married. As it turned out, Matthew wasn't even Mr. Dickinson's son. The revelation drove Mr. Dickinson to madness. He unleashed his anger on their home, smashing furniture and destroying precious family heirlooms that had been in Carol's family for generations. The police were called to calm him down, and Carol filed for divorce. Mr. Dickinson moved into an apartment and was prohibited from returning to school for a while. We had a substitute teacher for nearly a month, and rumors circulated that he was in a mental asylum, though the truth was uncertain. Then, one random Monday, Mr. Dickinson returned to school. The photograph of baby Matthew was conspicuously absent from his desk, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. Mr. Dickinson had undergone a radical transformation. He had cut his long, hippie-like hair, shaved his face, and traded his nerdy graphic t-shirts for a formal button-down shirt and slacks. His once laid-back smile had vanished, replaced by a harsh and mean-spirited demeanor. He became unreasonably strict, particularly with the female students. I couldn't help but wonder if his wife's infidelity had fueled his resentment towards women. Making eye contact with him resulted in harsh reprimands, and I did my best to blend into the background, avoiding his attention. It was disheartening to witness such a drastic change in someone we had once admired. As the school year progressed, we approached finals, and we were tasked with a final government project. We diligently worked on our assignments while Mr. Dickinson, in an unusually foul mood, graded papers at his desk. Then calamity struck. The lights went out, plunging the classroom into darkness. A storm was raging outside, and only faint natural light filtered through the windows. The principal's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing an electrical problem that had left us powerless. We were instructed to carry on as best we could. In our classroom, reliant on laptops, the lack of internet crippled our progress. This infuriated Mr. Dickinson, who inexplicably blamed us. He vented his frustration by hurling a chalkboard eraser across the room, narrowly missing a student. We sat in stunned silence, immobilized by fear. It was evident that Mr. Dickinson had lost his grip on reality, and we needed help urgently. As he continued to berate us, my anxiety gave way to a surprising surge of courage. I cautiously spoke up, imploring him to calm down. "Mr. Dickinson, please, don't you think you should calm down?" I ventured, my voice trembling. His response was swift and brutal. With a look of pure hatred, he slapped me across the face, and I burst into tears. Several students leaped from their seats in my defense, and Mark, a towering football player, positioned himself between me and Mr. Dickinson. Mark calmly instructed a classmate to fetch help from the neighboring classroom while shielding me. But before our rescuer could reach the door, Mr. Dickinson's demeanor abruptly shifted again. He seemed to realize the gravity of his actions and panicked. In a bizarre sequence of events, he placed a trash can filled with paper at the entrance, lit the contents on fire, and then locked us inside the classroom. Panic and chaos erupted as the flames spread rapidly through the room, fueled by the carpeting. Some students attempted to dial 911, but our cell phones were locked in our lockers. A suggestion to use the landline on Mr. Dickinson's desk was quickly dismissed due to the ongoing power outage. Desperation mounted as we realized we were trapped. Mark, the embodiment of heroism, tried to break down the door, joined by a few of his football teammates. However, our school's recent security measures aimed at preventing active shooters meant the door wouldn't yield. Our classroom had turned into an inferno and the smoke thickened. Breathing became agonizing and the situation grew dire. We continued our frantic pleas for help, and through the glass door we could see fellow students gathering outside trying to assist. But none of them had a key to unlock the door. As the fire's fury intensified, I made a suggestion. We needed to break a window. The idea resonated with my terrified classmates, and we began hurling objects at the window, attempting to shatter it. Our efforts proved futile until Mike, one of our classmates, took a heavy metal desk and heaved it at the window, causing the glass to shatter. Now, we faced a different challenge. We were on the second floor, and jumping out of the window was a risky proposition. But the urgency overrode our concerns about injury. We couldn't remain in the burning room. As we prepared to make the leap, the sound of sirens in the distance brought a glimmer of hope. The fire department had finally arrived, and they were greeted with a chaotic scene. Students were fleeing the building, and ambulances and fire trucks swarmed the area. Mia, one of our classmates, frantically signaled to the paramedics, drawing their attention to me. I was placed on a stretcher, struggling to breathe due to smoke inhalation. The paramedics fitted an oxygen mask over my face and began attending to my burns. Through the haze of pain, I overheard a paramedic asking if they had caught Mr. Dickinson. The response was chilling. He was nowhere to be found. Later, I woke up in a hospital bed, my parents at my side. I looked out the window and saw that it was nighttime. I examined my bandaged arms and legs, evidence of the burns I had sustained from the fire and the desperate escape. I croaked out questions about what had happened next. My parents informed me that, after setting the classroom on fire and leaving us for dead, I was never a big fan of school trips. They're too loud and everyone gets really drunk, then really sober, and then it's all really awkward the next day at school. But last spring, Mr. Sanchez, our head teacher, made a very attractive invitation to an end-of-the-year trip to a nature reserve. He said there would be tons of special activities to choose from, including guitar and creative writing workshops. That sounded interesting enough to give it a shot, but I ended up regretting it deeply, as you're about to find out. I was close to finishing high school, and I hadn't been on a school trip since my primary years. My friend Betsy encouraged me to give it a go, as it was the last chance at a paid-for trip before the much busier and much more expensive college years. So when we boarded the bus and left for the nature reserve, I was actually pretty excited. It was a long drive, and all of the students were singing songs with inappropriate lyrics. Betsy and I chatted and played on our phones until we arrived at the hotel. Well, it wasn't really a hotel, it was a complex with lots of mini cabins and a big common garden. The scenery was beautiful, and we were close to a few famous hikes in protected natural areas. But we weren't going anywhere on our first day, as it was already getting close to sunset, so everyone ate and then scuttled off to their rooms or the garden. I told Betsy that I really wanted to check out the creative writing workshop, as that was one of the things that made me want to come on the trip in the first place. The workshops didn't begin until the next day, but they all held a little welcome event that night. So I put on a nice dress and went to the creative writing cabin with Betsy. When we walked in, there were only a handful of people there. A couple of guys were looking at the available snacks, and a middle-aged man with frizzy blonde-gray hair was sitting down on a chair. I figured he was hosting the workshop as he came right to us when he saw us looking around. "Welcome," he said with a really wide smile. Then he just stood there, waiting for a reaction. I found it pretty odd, but some people are really friendly, so I didn't think much of it. I said a quiet "Hi, and Betsy," and I shook hands with him. I asked him if he was the workshop leader, and he said, "Of course, I'm Steve. Let me give you a tour of everything around here." Once again, I thought this was a little weird since Steve was only leading a writing workshop, so it wasn't his duty to show us the resort. I looked at Betsy, and she just shrugged in a "let's just go with it" kind of way. Steve took us outside and talked us through all the buildings, the music workshop cabin, the drama club, basketball, movie club, and so on. He then started walking towards the forest which encircled the holiday complex. Betsy asked him, "Where are we going now?" But Steve was extremely calm, still smiling in his creepy way. "You'll see. I sure hope you'll like it." By now, I knew something was off. I stopped where I was and said, "Steve, please tell us where we're going." He just looked at me and kept smiling. He finally said, "Oh, here we'll do." He then pulled a gun from the back of his pants, and Betsy shrieked in horror while he was pointing the gun at us. He also pulled some bits of rope out of his jacket and tied me to a tree facing the tree. I was shouting at him to stop doing this and wriggling as hard as I could, so Betsy managed to run away. Steve pointed the gun towards her and thought about shooting, but then just grunted and gave up. I figured that would have made too much noise and it would have blown his cover. So I started struggling to untie myself even harder, thinking he wouldn't shoot for the same reason as he didn't shoot Betsy. I looked back and felt like I was going to be sick. Steve had taken his pants off. I felt like this was my worst nightmare. Steve muttered something lecherous and horrible when Mr. Sanchez appeared with 2 security guards. They pinned him to the ground, stole his gun, and put it to his head. I was safe but deeply embarrassed about the head teacher seeing me like this. Needless to say, that wasn't Steve, the creative workshop host. The Real Steve arrived later in the evening, and there was a huge scandal at the resort for letting a stranger into a high school camp. The guy was arrested, but I couldn't enjoy the rest of the trip. I kept thinking about what happened and how close I was to something truly life-changing. I just hope other students have a more normal experience on their school trips. In life, we often find ourselves on unexpected journeys, much like the one I experienced on that ill-fated school trip. It's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and trust should be earned, not given freely. The trip I thought would be filled with creative writing and camaraderie turned into a harrowing ordeal, highlighting the importance of vigilance and quick thinking in times of danger. Sometimes, what appears to be an opportunity can turn into a nightmare. But through adversity, we learn about our own strength and resilience. It's a chapter in my life that I'll never forget, a cautionary tale about the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly innocent situations. As we navigate through life, we must stay vigilant and trust our instincts. Not every smile is genuine, and not every invitation is sincere. This chapter of my life serves as a stark reminder of the need to stay cautious and alert, even in the most unexpected of circumstances. I was in 6th grade when I signed up for a school trip to the mountains just before Christmas. It was a very exciting prospect for an 11-year-old with almost no friends. I had just moved to Montana that summer, and all the friends I had made previously were now hours away. We would stay in touch online, but I was really young and I wanted friends I could play with in real life. So when the opportunity for a field trip came around, I was thinking this is the time to join a few kids and become part of a group. But I was forgetting something. I was a shy kid and most of the groups were already formed. So when I got to the mountain resort, I tried inserting myself into others' conversations, but I didn't get any attention. Once we were having breakfast in this big hotel dinner, and I made a joke about the food there. But I didn't see I had food on my face, and the 2 girls were just like, "EW, don't talk to me with food on your face," and moved elsewhere. It was pretty discouraging, and I felt sad and lonely watching all these little groups laugh about something I couldn't be a part of. Our chaperone, Mr. Henry, was pretty relaxed. Every time I looked for him, he would be having a glass of something with another teacher or immersed in something on his phone. So, upset as I was about the whole situation, I left the resort and went wandering on the streets. The resort was midway between a little town and a snowy forest, so I decided I would walk towards the town as I figured it would be slightly less dangerous. I was pretty self-conscious, and I knew my mom would be very angry if she knew what I was doing, but I was angry myself, and I didn't want to be at the hotel anymore. I made it to the town and walked around, looking through the shop's windows and at a few people walking around. It was freezing outside, so there weren't that many people out. After a while, everything started looking the same. All the streets were straight, and they had the same kind of shops and bars. I wasn't used to walking alone either, so before long I got lost. I tried looking around me for familiar places. I walked to the end of every street, hoping to see the resort from there, but no success. Finally, someone saw me in the confused state I was in, a man in his 60s, maybe, dressed in a huge green coat and old washed-out jeans. He shouted at me from across the street, "Are you lost, boy?" Of course, at this point, I needed help, so I said, "Yeah, I'm on a school trip, but we're staying at this hotel outside of town and I can't remember the way there." Maybe I shouldn't have given out as many details, but I had no idea what this man had on his mind. He just smiled at me and said, "I'll help you. Come with me." He said he would drive me back to the hotel, but we'd have to stop somewhere on the way to his car. It's not like I had a choice, so I just went with it. We turned left, walked for a few blocks, then stopped at a little DIY store. It was his, I figured, as he unlocked the front door with a set of rusty keys. I told him I could wait for him outside, but he insisted I come in. "It's too cold for a young boy like you to be out there all alone," he said. I started feeling afraid as I realized I was stuck in this situation now. I walked into the store and he went through a door to the back. I could hear some clinking and some thuds. I had no idea what he was doing. I thought of running away, but right then he came out with a bag of something, just some tools he meant to bring to his garage for a while now. He smiled at me in a reassuring way, and I actually believed him for a second. He took my hand and led me back to his car, which was another couple of minutes away. It was a dark green truck with a lot of storage space. I hopped in the back as I was sure I didn't want him holding my hand again. He started driving, and I was looking carefully outside the window in order to spot the hotel and get this over with. He left the town and took a right down the main road. I was pretty sure that wasn't the way to the hotel. I asked him, "Are you sure this is the way to the hotel?" Then he looked at me and I met his eyes through the rearview mirror. My heart stopped when I saw his evil face laughing at me. He wasn't hiding his intent from me anymore. In fact, he was relishing in the moment, seeing me afraid of him. I was desperate. If I got to his place, no one would be able to help me. I had no phone on me, and we were going in the opposite direction, away from the hotel. I took a leap of faith, unlocked the door, and jumped out of the car onto the side of the road. He clearly did not expect that, as he didn't stop the car for a while. I curled into a ball when I jumped, and I managed to land without breaking anything. I was covered in winter clothes, so that might have helped. I got up slowly and started running towards the hotel. I did not look back, and I didn't even breathe. When I got to the hotel, I threw up. The first ones to see me were the girls that laughed at me that morning. I didn't care one bit about their comments anymore. They looked pretty worried and went to tell Mr. Henry about me. I told him what had happened, and he called the police and gave a description of the man in the car. For the rest of the trip, I stayed inside the resort and watched TV. I was too traumatized to even go out skiing with the rest of the kids. However, some of my classmates heard the story and came to talk to me. The silver lining, I ended up making friends at school. Nevertheless, it was a horrifying experience, and I hope that the police found the guy and gave him the right punishment. Last year, our music teacher, Tim, took us on a school trip to town to see an old concert hall and explore the structure of such a building. Tim was a cool teacher, hence his desire for us to all call him by his first name. He always had something fun planned for us and preferred interactive lessons over dry textbook explanations. I was in junior high and definitely liked Tim's teaching style, so I was among the first ones to tag along for the school trip. However, what started as a seemingly ordinary excursion was about to take a dark and disturbing turn. The concert hall almost looked like an abandoned building. It hadn't hosted any shows for a few years and no one had been tending to its facade either. There were about 15 of us on the trip, and Tim was busy being our entertainer, showing us all the quirky bits around the place, the hallway decorations, the stage design, the vintage chairs. My classmate George suggested we get off the main hall and explore the rest of the building. George was a fun guy, and we would often chat through fun drawings during boring lessons. He was the kind of friend I would ditch class with to embark on adventures. So we went downstairs behind the stage and found a huge network of corridors. There were many backstage rooms, some locked, some filled with old dusty props that George and I started trying on and picturing ourselves in. For a few good minutes, I felt like ditching Tim's tour was a very good decision. Then it started getting creepy. One of the backstage rooms had a broken mirror in it and some old food on the floor, old but not that old. Someone had been in there a few days back. We thought it was odd, maybe some teens had broken into the building and had some stupid fun inside. George took a photo of the broken mirror and commented that he would document this creepy backstage tour to the end. We got out into the hallway again and found another room with a locked door. There was another door at the end of the hallway with a maintenance sign on it, probably brooms and buckets, I said, as half of me wanted to go back to class. But George was adamant we should document the whole experience, so he walked confidently to the maintenance room and I followed. Just before opening the door, we froze. We could hear some really weird sounds coming from inside, some sort of scratching and a low moan. I wasn't sure whether that sound was human or if there were rats inside. I looked at George to see what he wanted to do, but he already had his phone out and was filming himself opening the door. The door opened with a long squeak, and I looked inside, and I felt a knot in my stomach. There were people on the floor in a very bad state. Some had scratched their faces until they left bloody marks. Some had teeth missing and holes in their arms. The stench was unbearable. It was a drug hotel, a place of despair and suffering. Most people didn't even notice us looking, lost in their own personal hells. One woman looked up, and when she saw George filming, she completely lost it. She began to scream with a horrible, hoarse voice and insulted us in all the possible ways. This angered another man who picked up an empty glass bottle and threw it right at us. It hit George's phone and his hand, cutting him and breaking his camera. We closed the door as fast as we could and then ran upstairs to find Tim. George ran to the bathroom to clean his cut, and I whispered to Tim and told him what we had found to avoid causing mass hysteria. Tim was concerned enough to round everyone up and head back to the school. He still joked that this was a truly entertaining concert tour, but I didn't feel the least bit amused. Seeing people in that state made me feel sick, sad, and worried. I couldn't get it out of my head for months after, and I kept dreaming about opening doors and finding horrible things on the other side. As I'm slowly forgetting about it, I'd urge all of you to stay safe out there. Okay, guys, that wasn't even half of it. There are plenty more disturbing stories where these came from, so make sure you. There used to be this kid at my school named Blake, a name that would soon become synonymous with fear and chaos. Blake faced a relentless onslaught of bullying from almost everyone who crossed his path, whether behind his back or directly to his face. It's not as if he didn't bring some of it upon himself. He was prone to violence and had a hair-trigger temper that often got him in trouble. His tendency to scream in teachers' faces, fueled by his indoctrination into radical ideologies, only added to his infamy. In fairness, it wasn't entirely his fault. Blake's parents had raised him in an environment that nurtured his disturbing beliefs. However, none of that seemed to matter to those who tormented him relentlessly. Blake was just as physically repulsive as he was in conversation. He had an air of hostility that clung to him like a noxious cloud. He almost got kicked out of school once for harassing a girl so terribly that she had to report him. Her offense? Rejecting him for smelling like hot garbage, a stench that mirrored his inner turmoil. The unraveling of Blake's life began innocently enough. It started on a regular Friday in our history class. Blake, in his usual disruptive manner, stopped the class to dispute something the teacher had said about the Civil War. What could have been a simple disagreement turned into a chaotic showdown. Our teacher, Mr. Wilson, was known for his strict demeanor and unwavering commitment to historical accuracy. He did not tolerate dissent lightly, especially from someone as volatile as Blake. Mr. Wilson shut him down with a cold, unyielding logic that left Blake humiliated and furious. This humiliation proved to be the catalyst for something far more sinister. Blake's anger escalated quickly, and he began screaming about how the country had been ruined, his voice trembling with rage. The rest of us, students who had grown weary of Blake's antics over the years, collectively laughed him off, convinced that this too would pass. Blake, unable to bear the humiliation any longer, stormed out of the school that day. Little did we know that the weekend would bring a storm of its own. Over the course of that ominous weekend, Blake took to Snapchat, sharing disturbing images that hinted at the chaos he was about to unleash. He posted pictures of himself holding pieces from his dad's extensive gun collection, his face contorted into a chilling grin. There were also images of him posing in front of a Nazi flag, another sinister relic from his father's possession. However, the most alarming of all was a photo of Mr. Wilson, our history teacher. Blake had printed out the image and taped it to a cardboard box, which he used for target practice. The caption beneath the image read, "Getting ready for school on Monday." It sent shivers down the spines of those who saw it. For years, people had made dark jokes about Blake, suggesting that he might do something terrible one day. But like most rumors, nobody truly believed he had the guts to follow through. It was the kind of urban legend we laughed off until it came crashing into our reality. Several students reported the disturbing posts to the school authorities, but what we should have done was contact the police. Unfortunately, none of us, including myself, took it seriously enough. If we had, perhaps the tragedy that followed could have been averted. Monday arrived with a foreboding sense of dread. I was in school attending our American history class during the 5th period when the unthinkable happened. Blake, who had arrived late as usual, was confronted by the school resource officer and a couple of administrators who had been alerted to his menacing posts. They demanded to search his backpack, suspecting that he might be carrying a weapon. Panic gripped the classroom as we realized that the monster we had feared for so long might be on the brink of unleashing his violence upon us. In a horrifying moment, Blake drew a pistol from his backpack and fired it, the deafening gunshot echoing through the school's hallways. It was a sound that sent shockwaves through my very being, a sound I will never forget. The whole school fell into an eerie silence, as though time itself had frozen. Then, as if on cue, the emergency lockdown announcement blared through the intercom. We knew without a doubt that it was Blake. I glanced at Mr. Wilson, our history teacher, who was standing at the front of the classroom. His face was ashen, and my mind couldn't help but superimpose the bullet holes I had seen in the image Blake had posted onto the real-life Mr. Wilson. With remarkable composure, Mr. Wilson initiated the lockdown procedure. He locked the classroom door, turned off the lights, and directed all of us to hide out of sight, silently praying that Blake would not find us. In those heart-pounding moments, I found myself reflecting on the lockdown drills we had considered tedious and unnecessary. Now, they seemed like a lifeline, a desperate hope that our training would kick in when we needed it most. Blake reached our classroom door in under a minute. He began to bang on it with a manic fury, screaming obscenities at us. His voice was filled with malice and the chilling declaration, "I know you're in there. I'm not an idiot." Fear gripped us, and some students began to cry into their shirts, trying to muffle their sobs. Others took out their phones, lip-streaming what they believed were their final moments or texting frantic messages to their loved ones. I felt a suffocating sense of helplessness, unable to think clearly or devise a plan to protect myself. My mind was consumed by the paralyzing fear that death was imminent, an uninvited guest in the hallowed halls of our high school. But just when despair threatened to swallow us whole, a gunshot rang out. The crying intensified and chaos erupted within our cramped hiding place. It was at that moment that I made a split-second decision. I sprinted toward the window, driven by an instinct to escape rather than to remain cowering in the darkness, waiting for Blake to find us. Others followed suit, but in the frenzy, I stumbled and was shoved aside by a fellow student. As I lay on the cold tile floor, I glanced back at the classroom door and witnessed a sight that defied reason. Blake stood there, clutching his face with both hands, blood oozing through his fingers. The door handle on the inside was mangled as if he had tried to force his way in. In the chaos, Mr. Wilson shouted for us to get away from the windows and back into hiding. He called my name repeatedly, realizing that I had frozen in the hallway. With a husky voice, I finally managed to utter the words that shattered the eerie silence. "I think Blake shot himself." A friend of mine rushed to the door, looked out of the window, and confirmed my words. Blake was stumbling away, leaving a trail of blood. With great difficulty, I got to my feet and joined my friend at the window, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Blake had failed to breach the classroom, and the door handle, twisted and broken, had kept him out. He was injured, bleeding, and retreating in agony. It was a moment of surreal relief mixed with the lingering terror of what had just transpired. Hours later, as we were finally freed from our hiding places, we learned the full extent of what had happened. Blake had attempted to open the classroom door by shooting the handle, but instead he had mangled the lock, causing an explosion of metal shrapnel that had struck him in the face. A piece of twisted metal had lodged itself in his eye, blinding him. That horrific accident marked the end of his rampage and spared us from further harm. It was a twist of fate, a cruel irony that defied the myths of opening locks with bullets. Blake surrendered before leaving the school, and he was subsequently tried as an adult. He would spend the next 2 decades behind bars, a consequence of his horrifying actions. Remarkably, the resource officer he had shot also got lucky, recovering without serious, lasting effects to his health. The chapter of terror and tragedy had come to a close, leaving scars that would last a lifetime. But it was also a testament to the unpredictable nature of human behavior and the fine line that separates chaos from order, survival from tragedy. My high school was nestled near an area plagued by gang violence, a backdrop that made lockdowns an unfortunate but common occurrence. These events, while tense and unsettling, were, for the most part, anticipated. We had grown accustomed to the sound of sirens and the sight of police cars racing by. Yet, amidst this prevailing sense of apprehension, there was one unforgettable event that left an indelible mark on my memory, an incident that had nothing to do with the typical gang-related activities. The source of my fear wasn't a fugitive on the run or the echoing report of a gunshot. Instead, it stemmed from a fellow student, someone we all recognized as inherently dangerous, Jason. He was the kind of student who defied easy categorization, a brilliant mind trapped in a web of personal turmoil, authority issues, and social difficulties. I'm sure every school has at least one student like him, the enigmatic and unpredictable figure who walks the thin line between genius and chaos. Jason's reputation preceded him. He had been suspended once for bringing a knife to school and then expelled in the same year for attempting to strangle a teacher with a shoelace. But, surprisingly, he returned the following year after spending several months in an intervention school, a place designed to provide a fresh start for troubled students. Unfortunately, it seemed that his stint there had done little to reform him. In fact, he appeared to have returned to even more trouble than when he had left. One day, I found myself in an unexpected situation with Jason. We had both landed in trouble for different reasons, and our punishment was to wait in the front office together. The assistant principal had planned to speak with each of us individually, but the office was buzzing with activity that day, and we had to sit and wait for our turn. During those few minutes, Jason engaged me in conversation, talking animatedly about the students he had encountered at the intervention school. He described them as pyromaniacs, drug dealers, and even gang members, a motley crew of troublemakers who had clearly influenced him. While I couldn't help but be entertained by his stories of their antics, I also sensed that they were a bad influence on him. Yet, what Jason said next sent chills down my spine. He casually mentioned that someone at the intervention school had taught him how to make a bomb. Before I could react or even ascertain if he was being serious, the assistant principal emerged from her office and summoned Jason, putting an end to our conversation. That brief encounter was the first and last time I ever spoke with Jason. It was a surreal experience because, despite all the unsettling rumors surrounding him, he was in remarkably high spirits that day. He seemed genuinely content, even though he was once again in trouble. I allowed myself to entertain the notion that perhaps he was on the path to improvement, but I would soon learn that his happiness was derived from something far more sinister. As the weeks passed, it became evident that Jason's newfound enthusiasm wasn't a sign of rehabilitation. Rather, it was a reflection of his longing to return to the intervention school and the company of the violent individuals who had become his twisted comrades. That desire, I believe, was the catalyst for the events that followed, events that would shatter our school's fragile peace. One day, during the second period, shortly after our conversation, Jason made a chilling move. He called in a bomb threat, setting into motion a chain of events that would leave us all paralyzed with fear. Though he was swiftly apprehended, Jason stubbornly refused to disclose the location of the alleged bomb. As a result, the entire school was evacuated, a sea of students streaming out of the building. I remember that moment with stark clarity. As we filed out of the school, our eyes fell upon Jason's clear backpack, casually abandoned against a hallway wall. Its contents were concealed by a garbage bag, but a dreadful realization washed over me. I knew what it held. Summoning my courage, I approached one of the administrators and frantically explained my suspicion. The administrator radioed the information in, and I was left trembling with the horrifying possibility that I had just saved countless lives. We were herded out to the football field, a vast expanse of grass where we were to wait during the lockdown. The sun bore down on us, and hours passed by agonizingly slowly as we baked in the unrelenting heat. We longed for the moment when we could return to the safety of our classrooms. Eventually, the bomb squad arrived to deal with Jason's ominous backpack, which was suspected to contain a dangerous device. The entire school underwent a meticulous search to ensure no other explosives were hidden within its walls. As time dragged on, my initial fear gave way to annoyance and boredom. Restlessness set in, and I began to act out, craving an escape from the tension that had gripped us for hours. I pretended to be suffering from a heat stroke, but my antics garnered no sympathy or extra space from my fellow students, who were equally on edge. In a moment of lighthearted jest, I playfully laid down across the feet of those seated beside me, attempting to alleviate the collective tension with humor. Laughter erupted briefly, but it was short-lived. As I lay there, my eyes fell upon something that chilled me to the bone. Taped to the underside of the bleacher seat right in front of me was a small box wrapped meticulously in duct tape. A handwritten note read, "This is the real one." Panic coursed through me as I realized that I was inches away from a bomb, an actual explosive device. In my haste, I pushed the legs of the student seated in front of me apart, desperate to get a better look. At first, he regarded me with confusion, thinking my actions strange. But when he saw the terror in my eyes, his expression shifted and he understood the gravity of the situation. It was then that we both realized the horrifying truth: he had been sitting on top of a bomb. A box concealed beneath the bleachers held the potential for devastation. Fear once again gripped us as we alerted an administrator, who promptly called for assistance. In that moment, we were reminded that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes it takes the unlikeliest of heroes to uncover it. In the heart of Tornado Alley, where the capricious skies could switch from serene to sinister in the blink of an eye, a curious routine had long established its place in the landscape of my school life. It was a tradition that predated the surge of emergency drills that later inundated our education. In the midst of the 90s, I found myself navigating these peculiar rituals with one memory standing out vividly, huddling on the cold, tiled floor of my school's interior hallways month after month for years. These drills, forged in the crucible of unpredictability, demanded we adopt awkward postures. As a young girl, I always felt a tinge of discomfort, convinced that I was exposing myself to the judgmental gazes of passing teachers. Yet, resistance was futile, instructions were orders to be followed. Strangely, I came to dread these extreme weather lockdowns more than the idea of a deadly tornado itself. While tornadoes paid our town a visit once in a blue moon, it seemed I had no choice but to bear the monthly ritual of inadvertently showing my rear end to the oddest teachers at school. To add to my dismay, these lockdowns occurred more often than expected, owing to the frequent weather vagaries that plagued our region during specific times of the year. It was during my 7th grade year in the merry month of May when the inevitable happened. At that time, my classroom was situated in one of those ill-fated temporary structures that the school had hastily erected to alleviate overcrowding. We called them portables, a name that belied their non-portable nature. These structures were flimsy at best, more akin to cardboard boxes elevated on stilts. In the event of a weather emergency, the protocol was clear: evacuate immediately and take refuge within the school's main building, leaving all our possessions, including backpacks, behind. We found ourselves hunched on the ground, heads cradled by trembling hands, adopting uncomfortable and questionable positions for durations that exceeded our usual drill routines. On that particular day, the teachers relayed ominous news. An extreme cyclonic thunderstorm bearing the ominous potential for tornadoes was racing toward us, poised to disrupt our daily proceedings. Their words were veiled in complex meteorological jargon, incomprehensible to my young mind. However, as time would have it, some words you learn to take very seriously. Usually, these lockdowns seemed overdone, bordering on the absurd. Yet, as the Halloween winds outside grew louder and the eerie sirens of the tornado warnings droned on, a palpable sense of dread crept over us. It was on this day that dread took the form of a real, ominous, and impending storm. Initially, morbid anticipation mingled with our fear. There was an odd excitement, the prospect of experiencing a true storm without the anxiety of personal property damage. The fate of the school building mattered little to me as long as my own safety was assured. There was even a strange part of me that hoped for a tornado to descend upon us. It would make those awkward monthly displays to our peculiar chorus teachers seem almost worthwhile. Yet, such hope was ephemeral. The classroom's windows concealed behind drawn blinds, and the lights remained extinguished, casting an eerie darkness within. The storm crept in, blocking out the sun's feeble attempts to pierce the gloom. The winds grew in strength, rattling our feeble portable as if the storm itself sought entry. Soon, rain and hail joined the cacophony, sounding like a relentless volley of meteoric projectiles. The once quiet hallway, usually echoing with students' chatter, was transformed into an unfamiliar symphony of chaos. Here was an unspoken presence, a force that united us all, transcending age and grade. In those moments of collective vulnerability, the ominous whispers of an approaching tornado brushed against our ears. Initially faint and indistinct, the low grumble of rushing winds resembled a distant freight train. However, it steadily intensified, and we all sensed the approaching monster. Though unseen, there was no denying its presence. It was as though the world outside conspired to confirm our fears. A tornado was undoubtedly upon us, and with each passing second, it seemed increasingly likely to strike us directly. Tears welled up in the eyes of many children, while teachers, their voices trembling, urged us to remain calm, though failing to conceal their own fears. As the walls of our portable began to tremble, even the educators sought refuge. In those harrowing minutes, we found ourselves in a shared position of vulnerability, one designed to protect us but now magnifying our fears. Our prior worries of exposing ourselves to prying eyes vanished, replaced by the more pressing concern, the ominous vibrations that filled the air, a stark reminder of the raw, uncontrollable forces of nature Oklahomans had come to understand. In my chest, I felt it, an inexplicable pulse echoing the turmoil outside. And beyond the fragile walls, I heard the symphony of destruction, the frenzied debris pounding against the door only to be flung away into the distance.